Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. The following episode is a collection of impromptu interviews from a recent TikTok live. My name is Jeremiah from Bigfoot Society. I just had a crazy interview today with a gentleman down in Webster County, Kentucky. This guy was sharing some wild stuff in an area. Okay, we got an individual that wants to come on up. Let's see what's up. Hey, Bill, how's it going?
Nice to meet you.
Cool.
My name is Bill
What's
Brock.
up, dude?
Yeah, it's good to meet you. My name is Bill Brock. I've been in the whole Bigfoot world pretty much since the media aspect of Bigfoot was a thing. So I've been around for a little while, I guess.
Okay.
And
Cool.
So I've been watching your podcast or whatever you want to call it here on TikTok, and I like what you're doing. And I'd like to know if you see any patterns or anything in what you're doing that might help us figure out what Bigfoot is, or if it migrates, or just some of your thoughts that you've kind of like found doing this.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been doing this for a few years, but I would say focused on Bigfoot just for like the last maybe two maximum. So something I've been trying to figure out lately actually is if the encounters, if people are starting to share more as we go along, or if it's just because I'm getting to be a bigger platform. And I'm not sure what the answer to that is, because I mean, as of right now, I'm getting people reaching out all over the place every single day. I would like to think that maybe it's people are starting to realize, hey, if UFO stuff is getting out there, my Bigfoot stuff can get out there, and I'm not gonna, be made fun of. So that's something I've noticed.
It
Yeah,
could be both things that you talked about, because what I found is a lot of people just want to tell their story. They just want somebody to hear what happened to them, and then hopefully have somebody that can relate to what they experienced, and then kind of like find this commonality and community within that. And that's something that has happened, in Bigfooting for years. And I think that, yes, you do have a larger platform. And, like I said, there's a lot of people that really want to share their story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point. Another thing I try to do that Sonia put in the comments is that I try to make a space where people can share just what happened. Don't have to worry about being made fun of or like judging or anything like that. I try to just let them be able to share. And then I ask some follow-up questions too, but for the most part, I try to let them just talk, and I think that's been very effective. But so you mentioned you've been in Bigfoot for quite a long time. Like, how long are we talking about, Bill?
At least, gosh, probably 2012. I dove into it really hard online. It might even be closer to 2008. So I started off with a good friend of mine, Sean Evidence, in Bigfoot Evidence. And there was a bunch of guys that were part of that, man. Rose Sahibi, I don't know, there was a bunch of us, Michael Merchant, all of us. And so I started rolling with those guys. And I don't know if you remember back when, what's his face there, said he shot the Bigfoot out in the Sierras. Can't think of his name.
Justin Smeha.
Yes, Justin. So I was definitely deep within that as well. And all those people are good friends of mine. And that's the crew I came into Bigfooting with. And so,
Oh, wow.
I've been doing this for a long time. I ended up having my own show on Discovery, where we chased, Bigfoot, aliens, and that sort of thing. And that turned into the whole paranormal slash UFO stuff I've been doing. I have a couple films out there in the world. I think there's one on Netflix I recently did called Marfa Lights. And we went to Marfa, Texas, and investigated some lights down there that people feel are UFOs. I also have done quite a few films with a guy named Stacy Brown. Stacy Brown's a really pretty well known Bigfooter. And Stacy and I have worked on multiple projects together over the years. And yeah, long story short, man, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been making films and yeah, just listening to people's stories for a lot of years.
It sounds like you do know some stuff about Bigfoot. Have you had any interesting stuff out happen out there? Have you gone out looking and had interactions or anything?
Yes, specifically one that I can't explain that a
Okay.
bunch of us were part of. I went down to Myakka, Florida a few years ago, maybe 6, 7 years ago now. And there had been a sighting where this guy filmed what he thought was a Bigfoot running through a field out in Myakka, Florida. So we went down there, and myself, Stacy Brown, and a few other people investigated this thing, and we ended up getting on thermal what seemed to be someone about 7 foot tall running naked through the forest. And I mean, we all saw it, and we went back the next day and found prints to confirm what we had seen. To this day, I still don't know what that was. If you go onto my YouTube channel and you go back
Okay.
way a long time ago, it's uh, gosh, I wouldn't even know what it's called, but it probably has something to do with Myakka, I would say. And there's a couple of videos in there, and the first video is pretty solid. It was us meeting the guy who filmed the Bigfoot, and we went out and talked to him, and he had a picture of a
Okay.
tree that he claimed that a Bigfoot had urinated on, and he tried to get DNA off of that. Um, yeah, it was wild, man. We definitely
Wow.
had something run right by us, and when I say there was multiple people there, we were basically in a line. There were two people together about every 30 feet, and we had the total was 6 people, no, seven people. This thing ran by me, ran right by the next group. We're all seeing this thing on thermal, and it runs right at Stacy Brown. It just about ran him over, and it just stopped in its tracks, turned hard left, and just went. It was gone. And man, we had all that on thermal. So yeah, I've definitely had encounters, but I still don't know what it was, man. We definitely saw something, but I don't know. I've had some stuff. If you look up like the I don't know, I guess like the Durham gorilla, or like if you just looked up my name and Bigfoot, you would come along
Okay.
this video that is a something out in the woods that a kid videoed with his cell phone. Um, and I
I remember that one. Yep.
I'm being really honest with you, man. I really did my due diligence to debunk that thing, because that's what I really like doing. I really like going out and debunking these situations and finding out what really happened. So anyway, I went and investigated this thing, and I couldn't debunk it. There was a definite trackway, and I'm not talking one or two prints. I'm telling you, like quarter mile of prints. There were broken trees within that path. Um, there were so many signs to point to this thing being a real Bigfoot that it really that's one that I really look back on, and I wish I would have just got my camping gear and spent a few days in the woods, because when I got there, it was fresh. It had just happened, and so I should have, looking back at it, just spent a couple nights in the woods, because I think that is probably the closest I will ever get to solving this mystery, because I believe that was a real sighting.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's very interesting. How, so you saw the tracks yourself. I mean, how far apart were those? Like, what was the gate that you were looking at?
I don't want to. I don't want to say without being sure. Um,
Right.
but, I don't like speculation. So I did have a friend of mine. His name's AJ. He's about 5'8", 5'9". He tried stepping in the prints and duplicating what he saw, and he had to really stretch to step in those prints. So I would say,
Mm,
whatever it was, from our calculations, was around 7 foot tall. We did do proper calculations. Because the prints were still there, man. So like what we did is we took the original video, shot it on the original phone, took and overlaid the original video, and I overlaid my buddy walking on top of the other one, and the measurements came out to whatever it was like 7 foot. So I know it wasn't the
okay.
kid. I know that kid wasn't the person or the Bigfoot or whatever it was in the video. And yeah, I don't have any explanation for it, but I'm willing to say that that's probably one of the best videos I've ever seen. If you look really close at his feet, as he takes a step forward, you can actually see the mid tarsal break flex backwards.
Mm,
So it doesn't just
okay.
flex forward. The mid tarsal break actually flex inward, and so it almost looks like he has a flipper on, like, you know what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
rolls
Yeah,
just
yeah. Oh,
like
I
that.
see it. Yeah.
So
It's so weird, man. Like, yeah, I've never seen anything like it, to be honest. I've actually never seen this one now that I think about it. This is weird.
it's pretty. It is pretty weird, and I honestly, really, I honestly tried to go there and debunk it. I pressured his father to pressure him to find out if he was lying, and his
Yeah.
father swore up and down that his son wasn't lying. And I,
Wow.
I did everything I could, and I still say that that's probably the closest I'll ever be to actually solving this.
Dude, that's wild. If people want to see what we're talking about, go to YouTube, go to the Bill Brock YouTube channel. It's the video, I believe we're talking about Maine Bigfoot footage enhanced is the
Yep,
one.
that's the one.
That's a really good view of it. But yeah, guys, check it out. This is it's good stuff. It's about 9 years old, so that's probably why, it's just old enough, like the Justin Smeha story, that people don't remember it. It's just old enough.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've been doing this stuff forever, man. I've
Mm,
literally researched all over the planet for this thing, and there's only two places I have ever been where I really think, besides here in Maine and that footage, that I think that there is a lot of activity. There's two guys that used to be really popular Bigfooters. It was Dallas and Wayne. Dallas and Wayne had a Bigfoot movie, and it was called My Bigfoot Movie, I'm pretty sure. And it was an absolutely
yeah.
amazing movie. It was really about the friendship between those two, but they went out Bigfooting and stuff. And I became intrigued with these guys after watching that film. And so I ended up hooking up with them and going out Bigfooting with them a few times and made some videos and stuff. And um, amazing guys. They have a place in the Wayne National Forest in southern Ohio. So I went out Bigfooting with those guys, man, and they took me to a spot where farmers dump their dead animals when they just die for random reasons.
Ooh.
Dude, it was wild, man. Michael Merchant and I were out there, and we were literally having like rocks and stuff thrown at us from the woods. And Michael Merchant, I really don't talk to him much anymore, but he is an amazing outdoorsman. He's a biologist. He's everything that you would ever want a Bigfooter to be because he is science based. And so we were out there, and man, we were like having things thrown at us, and we tried to flank it. We tried to do everything we could in order to get eyes on it, and we never could. But yeah, that place was definitely active. Wayne National Forest.
Wayne National. I need to double check. That is in Ohio.
Yes, sir. Southern Ohio, close
Okay.
to like
Okay, cool.
Portsmouth, I would say.
All right. It's in that southeast corner for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. North of Point Pleasant, though, definitely.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
really interesting.
yeah.
Oh man, Bill, I love talking to you. You've got a lot of good info. You're a good dude, I can tell. But man, we'll need to keep in touch for sure. We
Yeah,
can
yeah. I
probably
don't
have
want to
some
steal
good
your.
chats down the road.
Thanks for letting me jump on, and kind of chat for a minute. And yeah, I'll stick around and kind of see how things are going.
Absolutely. Thanks for chatting, Bill.
Yeah, take care, buddy. Bye.
All right, good stuff. That was fun meeting Bill. He seems like a solid dude. Let's get caught up with the comments here. And guys, if you're new to this, we're talking about Bigfoot. A few things to point out real quick. So, thank you to everyone that has been that sent um, some incredible gifts. Every gift goes towards future travel. I appreciate that. There's a lot of people that won't talk over the phone; they only talk face to face. So I appreciate everyone that does that. We got a question here. Has anyone had encounters with Bigfoot with UFOs and poltergeist? Okay, so that's interesting question. So a lot of people, like let's say Southwest Pennsylvania and Chestnut Ridge, people there's a lot of sightings where it's a UFO sighting, then Bigfoot the next day, or UFOs and Bigfoot together. Something about that area. You can look up Stan Gordon books, and yeah, you can get more info on that, Olan. Now, poltergeist, sometimes people will say is they'll have a interaction with Bigfoot, and then they'll come back home, and something will follow them home, and they'll start to have weird things happening around their house, shadow people, stuff being moved, poltergeist type activities. So I have talked to people that have experienced that, Olan, if that's what your question is. S asks anything in Kansas or Nebraska. Two things that come to mind. Uh, let's see. Actually, Kansas, not off the top of my head. But if we're talking about just over the line into Missouri, there's an area called Monkey Mountain just north of Kansas City. You might want to check it out. Nebraska, there's an area, a county south of Omaha called Odo County. It's wild. My buddy Steve Berg is investigating it. There's some wild, wild stuff going on over there, so look into that as well. How about Montana? Yeah, Montana's got some wild stuff going on. One of the things I talked to a gentleman named Ken Metzger a few years ago. He's a researcher up in Montana, and him and other people who potentially could be listening, wink, wink, have uh, let me know that yes, there are definitely grizzly bears that are getting their necks snapped in the Montana area, and most people think that they're from Bigfoot. So, yeah, many sightings in Montana going on the last few years. Kenneth, I would really like to see Sasquatch from the safe distance with a good vehicle. Yeah, no, I get it. There's some. I'll share something I learned out in Oregon. This is they took me 30 miles out in the woods in the Willamette National Forest to an area that's super squatchy, lots of activity. And I learned something very important out there is if you pull into an area where there's a lot of Bigfoot activity, it is best to make sure that your vehicle is turned around so that you don't have to do a turn really quick if something's chasing you. Do that ahead of time. These guys have been chased so much that they immediately, when they get out, before they park, they are turned around so they can jet out of there quick. It's a whole different story out there. Esther, did you see one? That's a great question. So I share this usually a few times, but let me go over what interactions I've had so far over the last 3 years. So starting 3 years ago, my friend Tate Hieronymus, who's a researcher out of Florida, but he has an area in Iowa, my home state. He finally got me to go out with him. We had some stuff happen. First time out, we had a tree get pushed over. We had wood knocks around our campsite. The next year, I heard whoops from my tent. This last year, I also heard whoops from my tent again. Another tree get pushed over. Wood knocks all over the place. No visuals. Also went to Oregon this last July. Roared at, screamed at, no visuals. Missed seeing one by about 5 hours. So I'm going back to Oregon again. I'm going back to Oregon again next year. Hopefully, if I keep going out there, I'll have something happen. I'm also going to Oklahoma, Southeast Oklahoma, next October. Allison, thanks for coming up.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, good, cool. So, up there in you said Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, what's going on up there?
Oh, a lot of squatchy stuff. So, we'll date back to like one of the earlier stories, probably the first one. So, Vancouver Island, like it's people think it's small. It's actually quite massive. So my boyfriend's his grandfather was like a police chief out in it's called Tassa. It's a real small town, and this would have been probably around 19, probably around the 80s. So, anyways, real small town, and they would go around with like a police boat, and anyway, so his grandpa, he found basically this hermit. So they meet this guy, and they're like, and this guy's lived out on his own for like 20 plus years. And so they developed a relationship, and he's like, hey, like, how about I bring you some supplies every, X amount of months. So, every few months or so, the guy would be waiting on the beach for him. He'd come up with the police boat and had him his supplies, and then off they'd go. They really didn't talk much. Like I said, this guy's a pretty big hermit. So then, anyways, one day he gets up and to the beach, and the guy's like nowhere to be found, like no place at all. So then he starts looking for him. He's never been inside his house or anything. They find his trail, and they find his like A-frame cabin, right? And so Ken's like banging on the door. He's like, hey man, like, are you in there? Like, what's going on? Anyways, the guy is like, he looks through the window, and he sees that he's like huddled in the corner, just like looks like he like, I don't know, saw like a horrific car crash or something, just starstruck. So anyways, he kicks down the door, and he's like, hey man, like, are you okay? Like, what's going on? The guy can't make out any words. So Ken hands him his police like notepad, and the guy's shaking, and he draws a Sasquatch basically in the doorway. And that guy left with them on the boat that day and never went back, and he lived there for 20 years. I have a ton of stories, actually. Let me know how many you would like me to tell.
What year was that again?
I don't know. I'm gonna say it's around, because Ken, he's around, he's in his 80s, so
Okay.
I would say, yeah, I would probably say like around 1980-ish, all in that area, like Vancouver
Yeah.
Island. People call like Vancouver Island like Ape Island.
I've actually talked to a gentleman from Gold River, which looks like is up in that area.
Yeah, no,
Let's see
it's
if
actually on the way. You have to go to Gold River to get to Tassus, actually. Another one, this is around Pearl Lake. This is my boyfriend's dad. These are all, like, it's kind of crazy. I feel like Sasquatch they kind of like pick and choose people, I think, that they want to make themselves known to.
Yep.
Right. So anyways, Pat, him and his friends, like there's this like cabin type thing that you can get to. And you have to like bushwhack, and then it takes less time. Like there's like a tinny that's like stashed in the bush. So if you take the tinny to this cabin, it would only take like 20 minutes to get across the lake versus like walking for like 2 hours around. So anyways, they've hiked up there and done all of that quite a few times. And so one of Pat's friends, I want to say it's Bert. He's a carpenter. He's like always got his carpenter belt on him. He's got dogs. They're like, like I think like coon dogs, like they're hunting dogs, right? So these dogs are, they're not scared of anything. They're meant to hunt. They're meant to hunt cougars and bears and deer. You know what I mean? Like they're not afraid of anything. So anywho, they're walking, and they hear noises, and they hear a hoo, 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 hoo. Like it's so loud that they can feel like the vibration in their chest, and they're freaking out, and they're like, all right, they ended up being able to cross the lake in like 10 minutes. Like they're hauling, right? So they get up to the cabin, they get in there, and Bert nailed, because he had his carpenter belt, right? Like he nailed the door shut. And then for hours, they had rocks like being thrown down the bluff at them. and in the morning, these dogs didn't leave the porch to take a piss. They pissed on the porch. Like, that's got to be something,
Oh, wow.
So,
man.
and that's, it's pretty crazy. I'll tell you another story. So this one is pretty recent. So my boyfriend's uncle, like he's a pretty like well-known guy around here. He's got like a lot of friends, a lot of guys like in the chartering business, like that kind of thing, right? So his friend tells him the story about, so he flies like a helicopter. And anyway, so there was like a government like geologist. He's coming to somewhere, it was somewhere around like the tip of the island to study like this like 1,000-year-old bear trail, anywho. So, they'd set up like a thing for him. Like he knew he was going to be out here for like a month. Like, obviously he's not unfamiliar with like being in the woods, like what's in the woods. Like he knew that he was there to like take samples, study this bear trail, etc. Right. Anywho, so he gets dropped off, and mind you, this guy has like thousands of dollars worth of like equipment with him. Like he's prepared to be out there for a while. So I guess this guy is, he's taking samples out of the water, and all of a sudden he has got, like boulders being thrown at him, like full on, like not rocks, boulders. So then he sees Sasquatch, right? And he runs to his cabin. He's freaking out. I guess these things screamed at him for like 8 hours. And anywho, he calls, the helicopter guy, and he's like, "You need to pick me up like right now." And the guy's like, "Hey man, like I can't, like it's dark, like it's whatever time it was, right?" He's like, "Okay, I'll come like first thing in the morning." And even like the helicopter pilot, he's like, "All right," like he didn't get any sleep that night, yada, yada, yada. So anyways, he flies over to him and, I don't know, lands the helicopter and gets out and turns around. He's like looking for the guy. The guy's already booking it into the helicopter. And he's like, "Okay." And he's like, "Hey, like, what about all your stuff?" He's like, "Let's just get me out of here." Right. So anyways, the helicopter pilot, like he has a pretty good idea of like what's going on. So he, the guy just like looks like he's, like seen something horrific. So he kind of turns to him and he's like, "So, little squatchy out here, eh?" And I guess the guy turned at him like wide-eyed and was like, "What do you know?" So he told him what he knew from like the local like indigenous people and just being in that area. Right. And so that's when he told him the story that I just told you. And yeah, so like thousands of, like, he was just like, he like somebody who's out there, like they know what you probably just wouldn't account for seeing something like that. But anyways, that's just a few of the stories.
Did that happen in Duncan then, or was that a different area?
No, that I think would be like, I want to say like, they said like around the tip of the island. So I'm going to say like around like Cape Scott area. Okay. But, it seems like actually just in the summertime, my boyfriend's parents went out camping. I think it was around Catherine Lake. And I want to say that's near like Port McNeil, just anywhere out that way. Right. They also had like another like kind of Sasquatch experience. I didn't really hear the story. I just know like they anyways, I didn't hear the full story, but I know that they recently had one as well. And honestly, these stories have been passed to me, and like I'm probably not doing them as much justice as as them telling them, but super interesting. Like I never really put a whole lot of thought into Sasquatch before, but I'm not somebody who needs to see them. I'm like, they're for sure real, like that. I'm good.
Oh yeah. I mean, that whole island I've heard stuff from all over Vancouver Island, like Nanaimo, the other side, just Gold River, all that stuff. But thank you for coming up and for sharing. It gives definitely some new areas to look into. And I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, no problem. I hear a ton of stories. Like I feel like I go looking for them too. Like I'm a hairdresser, so any of my clients that come from like the more rural areas, I always ask them if they have any stories. So it's pretty neat. But thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, my email's up there. If you ever want to pass it on to anyone, feel free to do so. But yeah, thank you for chatting.
Okay, see ya. Thanks.
Encounter.
You hear me?
Hey, Michael, thanks for coming up. So what happened up there in Canada, man?
Well, I was up there on a trip with my grandparents in 1967. We went to the Calgary Stampede was where we first started. And we stayed in a teepee with a tribe of Indians for 4 days at the Calgary Stampede. After we left there, we went to my great uncle lived in Hillcrest, Canada, and he was the superintendent of the schools there. And him, my grandfather, my grandmother, my great aunt Helen, my great uncle Steve, and 2 of their kids, and I rode horseback from their place in Hillcrest up into the mountains to go on a fishing trip, fly fishing mountain river up in Jasper Park. We were there for 3 days, and we got there late in the afternoon on the first day. And the kids' job was to go along the edge of the river, turning over rocks and getting what's called devil scratchers. We use them for bait. They're nymphs. And we were on a section of river that had an upper waterfall and a lower waterfall. And our campsite was at the bottom of the upper waterfall, which was a little larger than the bottom one. And the pool at the bottom of it was about 20 foot deep. And the water was so crystal clear there that you could flip a dime into the water. And when it hit the bottom, if it was facing heads up, you could read the date on it. You could see the fish swimming around. It was so fantastic. So it was late afternoon. We had dinner and we went to bed that night. Got up the next day and started fishing this hole. And I was too young to work a fly rod at that time. I was only 11. And the 2 other kids that were there were slightly younger than me, 1 girl, 1 boy. And we fished for the better part of that morning into the afternoon. It was a real hot day in August. Temperature got up close to 90 degrees. I was in cut-off blue jeans, a t-shirt, and my tennis shoes with no socks. So when we finished our fishing for the day, the women were cleaning the fish and cooking shore lunch. I asked my grandfather if I could go for a swim. And he said, well, there's a couple of rules you have to follow. One, when you jump in, you have to jump in far from shore as you can get. Because I was jumping in above the upper waterfall, going over the waterfall, down the pool to the second waterfall, over that one, and then there was rapids, probably another 100 yards downriver from that. There was a gravel bar on the far side of the river. It was a rock island. And he said, once you get down to that, you have to get out and come back up again, because past that area, the river turned to the right around the mountain. And that's where the rapids got shallow and the grizzlies fished down in that area. So I jumped in, kicked off my tennis shoes. I ran and I pulled my shirt off. I jumped off the bank and hit that water. And it was like getting cut by 1,000 razor blades all at once. That water is so cold. It's coming right off a glacier melt from up in the mountains and running down. That's how they took all the beer and the pop for us kids on the pack horses. And when we got there, we made a little pool for it on the side of the river, and they would set the bottles of the warm beer and the warm pop in there, and within a half hour it was ice cold. So
Oh
the
my
water
goodness.
temperature was probably just a little above 32 degrees. So I went over the first waterfall, I went down to the second waterfall, over that one, and as I'm going down, the water's carrying me down, the current's carrying me down. The two other kids were running along on the bank, climbing boulders and hopping boulder to boulder and hooting and hollering and having a blast. We were just being kids, you know. So I get up and I get out at the rock bar, and as I get out and we come back up to where the camp is at, I went and I did it again and jumped off and hit that water again, and over the waterfalls I went down, and those kids ran down with me again, hopping boulder to boulder and hooting and hollering. And I get down to the rock gravel bar, and I didn't realize just how cold my body was getting by that time. I was getting real close to the point of hypothermia. But I got out and we climbed our way back up again. And this whole run is probably somewhere between a quarter mile and a half a mile. So when we get back up to the top, I wanted to do it again. And I didn't, like I said, I didn't realize just how hypothermic I was getting. So when I jumped off this time, I didn't get out far enough from the bank. And when I went over the first waterfall, there was a big rock, flat rock, that we were fly fishing from that overhung and went down into the water. I didn't know it at the time that it was hollowed out underneath. And when I went over the waterfall without jumping too far out, the eddy took me along the edge, and I got slammed against the edge of that rock and drug underneath it. And I grabbed a hold of the edge of the rock with my fingers, and my feet and my legs swung downriver, and now I'm laid out, and my nose is underneath this big, huge, massive rock, and I'm fighting the current and pulling myself back to where I got my nose to the edge of the rock, and my great uncle and my grandfather were at the top of it looking down at me, and I'm looking up at them. And my great uncle like made this real funny face where his eyes got real wide open, and he points and he's like, "Oh, there he is," because they were wondering where I disappeared to, because I went underneath that rock, you know. So about that time, I was getting low on breath, and he made me laugh. So now I blew a whole bunch more air out, and I'm still fighting this current, not knowing what to do. And a voice came in my head and said, "Use your feet, find a foothold." And I started running my feet on the underside of that rock. And sure enough, I found a little crevice, and I was able to get my toes up into there. And it said, "Now let go and push hard with your legs." This voice in my head. So I did that, and I came popping back up into that lower pool below the big falls, and I went down the river, but now I've been underwater for almost a minute. And I was hypothermic to begin with. Now I can't feel my hands. I'm not able to swim very well. I go over the second waterfall. I don't know how I kept from drowning. I mean, I swallowed so much of that river water. It was amazing that I survived it. But I get into the rapids area. I'm approaching that rock bar, that gravel bar. And this time, those two kids that were running down with me they got too tired out from the first 2 trips that I made. And so I got down to the gravel bar, and I can't stand, I can't use my hands to swim. So what I'm doing is there's big boulders in the river, and as I'm going by one, I'm hitting them with my legs, because my legs are out in front of me and my body's back upstream side. I'm grabbing them with my arms because I can't use my hands or my fingers. They're too numb. And I'm holding on, hugging onto these rocks, and I would hold on as long as I could, and I'd lose my grip, and I'd go down river another 10, 15 yards, and I'd get a hold of another one. And this happened like 3 times. And then I got down to the end of the gravel bar and disappeared around the corner from where all the grown-ups were. And right about that time, I looked over my shoulder as I'm holding on to this rock, and there's about a 1,300-pound boar grizzly bear sitting in the water fishing right in line with where I'm coming down the water stream. I'm going to end up right in this thing's mouth.
Oh my goodness.
So I said a little prayer in my head. I said, please, Jesus, I don't want to die by the teeth of this grizzly bear today. And right after I said that, in my mind, this big, loud roar, scream came from up the mountainside on the other side of where that gravel bar was. So it was the opposite side of the river that we were camping on. There was a finger ridge that came down there to that gravel bar location that kept us from seeing past that point because it was higher, that finger ridge. This Sasquatch came running down the side of that mountain carrying 2 rocks that were bigger than bowling balls. He was palming them in his hand. And he came right down to the edge of the river, and when he let out that scream roar, that grizzly bear didn't even look to see what made that noise. It turned and hightailed it out the opposite side of the river and disappeared into a willow thicket. So now I'm laying in the river, freezing my little bones off. I mean, I'm probably 80 pounds soaking wet at that time at age 11, you know. And here's this big, hairy monster that was probably a foot, maybe 2 feet taller than that bear, if that bear were to stand up. And it's holding on to these 2 rocks. And I'm looking at it, and it's looking at me. And this thing says to me in my head, "Are you okay?" And in my mind, I said back to him, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, why aren't you getting up?" And I said, "I'm too cold." In my mind to him, I am too cold to even talk. I was too cold to talk once I got plucked out of the water. But then I kept looking at him in the face, going down his body, looking at those rocks that he was carrying, looking back up at him, and he kind of knew what I was thinking. I was thinking, you know, I was scared of him having those rocks. What are you planning on doing with those rocks? And he says, "Oh, those were for the bear." And so I said, "Are you a monster?" In my mind. What's an 11-year-old kid going to say to a gigantic, hairy person standing there? And he says, "No, I'm the same as you." And I was thinking in my mind, okay, if you say so, but I've never seen anybody that looks like you. And then about that time, I heard my great uncle and my grandfather were running with their bear rifle and the shotgun down the bank of the river coming to get me. They had heard the scream roar, but they didn't see the thing. And when I turned to look to see where they were at, and then I turned to look back to see where the Sasquatch was, he was disappearing through a portal. And my great uncle was wearing hip waders that came up to his crotch. My grandfather didn't have his waders on at the time. So he came out in the river and got me while my grandmother, she ran down too, and she's intuitive. She had a towel with her because she knew I was going to be cold and wet. And so my uncle picked me up, plucked me out of the water, carried me over to the bank, put me down. My grandmother wrapped me up in the towel, dried me off, and tried to get me as warm as she could. And then they picked me up and carried me back up to where we were camping. And I was throwing up water. I was just shaking and shivering. My teeth were chattering. I couldn't talk. They carried me back up there and laid me down next to the fire that the women were using to cook the fish that we had caught. And they laid me down there. They covered me with all kinds of blankets and sleeping bags, got underneath the covers with me and wrapped me up in their arms and rubbing my body and trying to get me warm again. About 35 minutes after they did that and got me out of the water, I was able to talk again. And I said, "Did you see my Savior?" And they thought I was talking about Jesus. And I said, "No, I'm talking about that big 10-foot hairy guy that was probably 1,000 pounds. And they said, "What?" And I said, "Didn't you hear that scream roar?" And they said, "Yeah, we heard that, but we never heard anything like that before in our lives." And then, yeah, it was amazing. Then after that, we stayed with my great aunt and my great uncle for, I think, a week after we got back from that fishing trip. And after we left their place, we went all the way up through Alberta. We went from the Jasper area up into Banff. Then we went all the way up into the Northwest Territories. We were there for 3 months. And my grandfather had a 65 Buick Wildcat at the time. And I was always riding in the back seat. We went all the way up into the Northwest Territories. Then we went further west and we came back down the British Columbia, the east side of British Columbia, right close to the Alberta border. And then we went all the way back down and cut back to the west again and went north, and we went all the way up into the Yukon territories. We were between, I think it was Dawson City and Beaver Creek. And we were fishing a river there. And every time we would go to one of these locations, my grandfather had grown up in British Columbia. He was from the Ukraine originally. And when him and his brother were like 1 and 2 years old, his father defected, left their mother in the Ukraine. He took the 2 boys and fled to British Columbia. So my grandfather grew up there for the first 16 years of his life, and he wanted to show me all the things that he experienced as a kid growing up out there. He knew so many native people. Every time we would go somewhere to take another fishing trip, to take me to a different river to go fish, he would leave the keys to his 65 Buick Wildcat, and the man would give us like 4 or 5 horses, 3 to ride and a couple to pack the gear, and we would go for a week and stay on a river in different locations all throughout this area. I spent time around Lillooet. I didn't realize at the time that this happened to me in Jasper Park, that I had this ability to be able to mind speak with these beings. But when I got to the Yukon, we were camping again on the river, and you don't camp right on the river because it's too much noise from the water to hear any approaching grizzly bears or anything like that. We're just sleeping on bedrolls on the ground. We didn't have no tent or anything like that, but you had a fire going at night. And the first night that we were there, I heard some whoops and some wood knocks coming from the other side of this was a big river that we were on. You couldn't wade across this one. You wouldn't want to go swimming in it. It was that big of a river. We were on the Canadian side of it, and on the opposite side was Alaska. So while we were there, we had the horses tethered. We had a rope tethered between 2 trees, and we had the reins tied to that rope. On the second night we were there, we came under attack about, I think it was probably close to midnight, where this group, I guess you call them clans, because they run in like a family group. I guess they call themselves clans. And they started throwing rocks and throwing trees, small trees, at us. And so in my mind, I'm trying to talk to them, and I can't get through to the ones that are doing this attack. But the one that I had the encounter with in Jasper Park was picking up my mind speak, and he showed up through a portal there in the Yukon. And he went and had a parlay with had one from the clan that was throwing the things at us. And when he came back and talked to me, he told me that it's under control, you guys are safe, but you have to leave this area now. So we went to leave, and my grandfather and grandmother were picking everything up and packing them into the pack horses. We tried to untie the reins from the horses. They had been spooked so badly and were jerking on their reins that the knots got so tight we had to cut the reins with a knife, because we couldn't get, or you would have had all 3 horses tied together with this rope, So we got that all set, and we started leading the horses out. And this is like 1 o'clock in the morning now. And trying to maneuver through mountainous areas is not the thing you want to be doing. And I'm only 11 years old at the time. I asked him, why did you help me when I was in the river freezing the first time I saw him? I asked him, why did you help me? And he said, because you're worthy. And at 11 years old, I didn't know what he meant by you're worthy. And I was thinking, well, is it because he seen me swim in this river that he's never seen a person do that before? Or was it that I was praying to Jesus to not let me get eaten by the bear? But then I found out when we were in the Ukraine that that's what his name for me was. That's just what he called me, like a name. So we packed up. He went back to Alberta through a portal. We packed up the horses and let them out, went back and gave the guy back his horses and his equipment. My grandfather had to replace the reins that we had to cut, give him money for that. We left there and we went south again along the coastal BC, the west side of BC. Went down to Jasper or Vancouver. We went to Vancouver Island. Went to Victoria on Vancouver Island. And my grandfather, me, and my grandmother were walking a trail that goes along through the middle part of the island. The further to the coasts that you get, the closer to either coast you get, it becomes unnavigable on foot. But in the middle part of it, there was areas where you could, walk fairly easy through. We were heading for a river that my grandfather wanted to fish. It was a good steelhead river. And as we were walking along, I got mine spoke to again by a different clan of these things. And they told me that not to keep going because there's danger ahead, to turn around and go back. And I didn't want to tell my grandparents at the time that these things are talking to me and telling me what to do. So I just made up a thing. I said, you know what? I'm really hungry. Can we go get something to eat? And I'm kind of cold and hungry. And I got my grandparents to turn around and take me back to Victoria on Vancouver Island. But that's 3 times in 1967 that I had encounters with them.
That is intense. I feel like there might even be more to this, but
There
is
is. There's
there is,
much
yeah,
more.
absolutely. Would you be able to reach out to me through my email? Um, I feel that it would be cool if we could have like a follow-up interview.
Because I also had
Yeah.
encounters in Ohio.
Okay.
I had an encounter in Georgia, one in Florida, and one here in Michigan.
Holy mackerel.
I believe that, I don't know if you've ever heard of the term being tagged.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, I believe that that's what happened to me on the river on that first encounter. When he asked me why I wasn't getting up, if I was okay, and I told him I was too cold, I could feel, it's hard to describe, kind of like a magnetic or electrical type of stimulation in the back part of my head.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
Absolutely.
a
I've heard that a lot. Yep.
vibration through my body that I think he was warming me up through infrasound,
Yep.
or something like that. I believe that he kind of like saved my life that day on that river. But I don't know if he did this on his own validity or whether the Savior, Jesus Christ, asked him to do it for him, following what Jesus wanted him to do. I don't know. In early 1980s, I went to Cleveland, Ohio to become a bricklayer. My uncle he was a general contractor in Willoughby, Ohio. And Salt Fork State Park is just northeast outside of Cleveland, near Willoughby. And I had an encounter there where I saw one of these things. And then in 1983, I was down in Georgia working on a high-rise on the Chattahoochee River. And I met this Marine guy fresh out of the Marine Corps. He was from Michigan. I was from Michigan. So we hung out a little bit. And one Saturday we went to Kennesaw Mountain in Georgia. It's a little north, I believe northwest, a little bit of Atlanta. And we were in the parking lot drinking beer. And he smoked cigarettes. I didn't smoke. And he said, you know, I could beat you in a foot race up that mountain. And I said, yeah, not on your best day, you couldn't. And so we took off for a foot race. And I made it up to the top of that mountain. And he was probably only a quarter of the way up from the bottom by the time I made the top. So I was up there just catching my breath and trying to rest. And here was a female Sasquatch doing the tree peeping, where she would lean out and look at me. And then when I would look back at her, she would duck back behind the tree. So I did the mind speak thing with her. But the thing is, a female like that is never going to be alone. There's always going to be a big male nearby as a protector for her.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't see them by themselves, from what I've heard. Yeah.
No. They are in clans, and there's clans all over, because now I've experienced them in 3 different locations in Canada. But I like to hunt different locations and check out new areas.
At this point in the interview, Michael lost connection and was unable to continue his account. Here at Bigfoot Society, our goal is to provide a platform for those that have encountered Bigfoot to share their encounter in a safe and respected environment. But we need to hear your story. If you've experienced something that you just can't explain, please send me an email at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Then we can start the conversation. And I know a lot of you have not shared your encounter at all. It's been 20 years, and it's time that you get this off your chest, and then you can get some well-deserved rest, because I know you haven't been sleeping. I understand what you're going through, and I appreciate every one of you listening.
Bigfoot Society podcast, hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Slaya. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend, Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list.
These are all in Oregon, by the way. Oak Ridge, Dexter, Fall Creek, Deschutes National Forest area, Cultus Lake, Spirit Lake, Subtle Lake, McKenzie River area, Sweet Home area, the area west of Crater Lake, east of 230 West Diamond Lake Highway, and north of 62 Crater Lake Highway.
You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.